Lots to get through here, including this. Teen vaping is spiralling. There's literally no surprise to me when I read that headline. The science behind it is actually quite brutal. This has been looked at by the British Medical Journal analysis that's warned that teenagers are uniquely vulnerable to nicotine. Lots of problems, they argue, which are attention, lasting hits to attention, memory, mood, school performance, and a fast track to addiction that opens the door to other substances and smoking. Many people will be divided on that point. The suggestion of why this has happened goes something like this. Governments have been asleep at the wheel because lots of the industry, and I assume the smoking industry, have come along and said, look, you know, get adults onto vapes because it's better than smoking, and everybody went along with it. But in doing so, it was the law of unintended consequences. Loads of kids then took it up, and of course they are strawberry and bubblegum flavour and stuff, and so what could go wrong? Well, there's still an addictive component to vaping, and many saying it's now out of control. Let's speak with Caroline Cerny, who's the Deputy Chief Executive of the Action on Smoking and Health, ASH. Good afternoon to you, Caroline. Nice to have you with us. What do you make of this assessment from the British Medical Journal and where we're at on this this story of kids and vaping?
Yeah, so the article in the BMJ was written from a global perspective, and across the globe, you know, we are seeing that, you know, the same problem in lots of countries as you described it, that vapes are an effective smoking cessation tool, but they've also become really popular with young people. So in the UK, we have actually seen a slight levelling off in our vaping rates among teenagers. So for the last couple of years, we haven't seen the increases that we did see a few years ago, and the government is taking some action to make the products much less appealing to children. So the tobacco and vapes bill that's going through Parliament right at the moment, in fact this afternoon, will give the government powers to stop these if it's the thing that keeps people smoking. So it's definitely not something that we want children to be using. Whether it's a gateway to smoking is a bit more kind of complex to try and kind of wrap our heads around. We certainly know that children who vape also smoke at much higher levels, but we don't necessarily know that one is causing the other. There's theories around the children that vape may be children that are more inclined to take risks, you know, and may have been smoking anyway. They also are much more likely to use drugs and use alcohol as well. So there's kind of quite a complex picture around risk-taking behaviour, which we know has always been something that, you know, the teenagers do.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I mean, I remember asking my mate's daughter, who was 16 and a vapor, and I said to her, have you ever smoked? And I might as well have asked her if she'd ever killed a dog. You know, she was so mortified by the question. Has she ever smoked? It was almost like a completely separate thing in her head. It didn't equate that this was anything to do with smoking.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting trend, because when we look at adults who are vaping, the vast majority of them will be ex-smokers, so people who've successfully used vapes to stop smoking, which is a really good thing, because although vapes are not risk-free, they're much less harmful than smoking. But the reverse is true when we look at the data on children vaping. Most of them, you know, haven't smoked, and you know, it's not a good thing. But the good news story in all of this is that children are not smoking. You know, we're seeing much lower levels of children smoking than we ever have, which is good. There is
obviously some issues around specific types of vape, as I understand it, and the flavourings. I know there's been some investigation into that, you know, smoking one type of vape could be different to smoking some of the more varied flavours, which may contain other things.
Well, at the moment, there's no regulation, you know, on the flavours, and that involves both flavour composition, so the ingredients, but also how they're described. And I think that's the really kind of pernicious issue at the moment. They're called, you know, candy floss bubblegum, or, you know, raspberry surprise, and these are things that make them look like they're products for children. You know, it's no wonder children want to try them.
Indeed. Caroline, thank you for your time. Really appreciate that. Caroline Cerny, Deputy Chief Executive for the Action on Smoking and Health, ASH. Thank you to them. There used to be a group called Forest. Do they still exist? The Freedom Organisation for the Right to Enjoy Smoking and Tobacco. I think that's what it stood for. That's a hard sell if you're running that place these days, I'd imagine. But I remember interviewing them loads of times. This comes from Keith in Shrewsbury. No way should we push for a general election yet, purely because Reform don't have enough potential MPs and will just be stuck with either the Tories again or a hung parliament. I did think about that if they said, if Keir Starmer in theory just went, there's a general election going to take place in January, I mean, lots of political parties would be stuffed. Reform would have a very big mountain to climb in terms of trying to find enough people in that. So, but they kind of probably would still do it, and many people would be voting for people perhaps slightly untested in the sense that they weren't for. But again, who is familiar with their local candidate before an election? We had a Lib Dem guy knock on our door at the weekend. I'd forgotten about that, and he was about my other half somehow engaged in conversation with him, and I kept shouting, "Come away from him! Come away from him! He is dangerous!" And you know, he was looking across his shoulder. I said, "Quick, move! It's a Liberal Democrat. He's in our garden." And the kids were crying, and the dog kind of faked being dead, and all sorts of the fish began to turn upside down and float on the top. And he just stood there talking about, well, what I would do is actually do more on the roads and the potholes. And no, nothing's been done so far, as you can probably see. And all of this was going on, and he was doing this while sitting on a space hopper. And I thought, this man is an absolute nut job. And then he, you know, started to run around naked in our garden. In the end, I had to get the hose pipe out to get rid of him. But that's what happens when a Lib Dem knocks on your door. Now, I don't know who this guy was, but perhaps at the next election he will be the local Lib Dem candidate for the Lib Dems in my neck of the woods. But you know, unless he knocked on the door, you wouldn't have known him. So I suppose, if Reform, my point being, if Reform had to cobble together 500 representatives, then I don't think people's prime concern will be, well, I've never heard of him, because you've probably never heard of half the candidates that stand when there's a general election, even if they were selected to do so some time before. Bob.